What is the deal, beautiful people? My name is Ramon. Welcome back to the channel. Today's topic is a journey back to the past. I'm talking about the Canon Rebel T4i. This was the camera that we first used to start Lifestyles Defined, which is our big lifestyles brand. The link is always down in the description below. A few of you may know this channel is kind of an offspin of the Lifestyle Defined brand. But yeah, so I've got some very real history with the T4i. However, it was only for video at the time. I think probably still now it does amazing 1080p video. Of course, everything's shifted towards 4K these days, but very capable camera. And since I started my photography journey, I never really went back to see, you know, what the T4i had to offer. And it was such a sad thing because I've learned so much in photography, and I think there was a lot to be appreciated by that camera. However, I came back to the T4i because of a photo series I was doing around the house, a photo essay actually, sorry, I was doing around the house, and I decided, hey, I might as well just, what's the most simple non-advanced gear I can find? And I didn't want to use my cell phone, so I just went back to the oldest camera that I had, and that was the T4i and a nifty 50 1.8, and that's what I used to tell the story and execute those photo essays. And since then I've used it on 3 or 4 other quarantine themed photo essays around the house, and I'm quite enjoying it. You know, it's a very enjoyable camera to use. I like the color science, which is the buzzword of today. And today I mean the last year or two. Canon really does have some pleasing color science, so that's pretty dope to see. Shooting with a nifty 50 is neither here nor there to me. I'm not a big I'm not a big snob when it comes to resolution. And then of course this is a crop sensor, so it's probably more like a 65 or 70 or whatever that math equals. So I mean, it's whatever, you know, if I don't have space to shoot it, I'll just recompose it another way. But because I'm such a fan of mirrorless, and not for any particular reason, it's just when I started to pick up the camera a lot more, I gravitated toward mirrorless because I'm a technology guy, and I just wanted the latest and greatest tech. And this camera has really brought me back to the conversation and the parallels between mirrorless and traditional DSLRs. And interestingly enough, it's still a stalemate to me. I mean, they both have their pluses and minuses. They're both very capable. The first thing I can tell you about going back to the T4i, my God, what a comfortable piece of kit to hold. It was, you know, it's a lot more chunky of a device, and the grip is because of it is so much bigger and so much more comfortable. I can tell you it's very, very comfortable to hold, and I can see how using it over time, that grip and that chunkiness is more of an asset than anything. I can't really get into it about weight because I don't really have any super heavy lenses, but I mean, it's fine. I really generally don't have any complaints about the weight of cameras. That's just not me. But yeah, it is what it is. Secondly, using the viewfinder is kind of trippy because I am so conditioned to use electronic or digital viewfinders that actually just looking through a glass is kind of like, whoa, the megapixels on this glass are amazing. Right? So that was kind of refreshing. I can say that the battery life on this thing, I remember charging it maybe like a year ago. I picked it up to do something a year ago, and I charged the battery, and I put the battery in a few weeks back and it's still working, and I still haven't charged this thing and it's still got a ton of battery. So yeah, I mean, DSLR, how about that? Right? Some of that stuff still holds true, and I didn't get into any of the, you know, is it faster focusing or better tracking than mirrorless, because it's not the type of photography I do. And then on top of that, we're in the middle of a lockdown, so what the hell am I testing? Am I testing that? And one other weird quirk that I do enjoy, some of my, not all of my mirrorless cameras have the articulate fold-in screen, or the flippy screen, a lot of people call it, but this camera did, and it was quite a joy to actually close the display. So I swung it around and closed it, and I was using single shot, and it was kind of a detox for me. Like I wasn't looking at any of the images that I took, and I wasn't overly looking at the settings that I used. You know, it was what I got is what I got. And interestingly enough, I was happy with a lot of my results. So there, how about that? A few things I did not like about the experience going back to a DSLR, back to that viewfinder. I was so used to having my image, seeing the exposure of my image in the viewfinder, that it was something that I really miss going back to the DSLR. In tons of light, it's okay. No real qualms with it, but it's when light's not ideal. You know, either it's overexposed, too much light, or not enough light. It's kind of trippy that you can't gauge, you can't see in real time the exposure you'll get and how to adjust. So I just kind of had to make some judgment calls. Well, looking at the meter, the exposure meter here, and then how, you know, the camera, I remember the camera working. This is just the image that I'm gonna get. And more times than not, I did get the shot that I wanted. And if I didn't, I had enough, because I was shooting raw, to tweak and bring it back to where I wanted it. So that was kind of one of the things. I did have to rely a lot on the exposure meter of the camera. So I was running, because you guys know I run auto ISO a lot, running auto ISO, and then sort of just using the shutter and the aperture to get my preferred image. I don't think it was a downside looking at the exposure meter, but in the absence of an EVF where I could see the exposure real time, the exposure meter is kind of dope. And it really is a very powerful tool. So I wouldn't say it's a negative or a positive. It's just something like, oh yeah, here's one more tool that I often don't really need, but it's good to know that it's still there. Particularly, these next two are a knock particularly or specifically to the T4i, not DSLRs in general. The button placement I find to be wildly annoying, and not only the button placement, but the functionality of the buttons. And as I went on my journey a few years back to learn manual exposure on a camera, I never realized how important it is to have a button layout that's conducive to learning this dance between your aperture, your shutter, and your ISO. And looking back and using this camera now, I've got to press a button, hold it to adjust my aperture. And without pressing that button, that dial, I don't know, it adjusts the shutter. And it's super weird. Like and I can get it now. I see why learning manual photography for so many people is difficult, because the way the camera goes about it, or the layout of the buttons, it's confusing. And not only is learning the exposure triangle, it can be confusing as is, here goes this other layer of something that's just didn't need to be. And I since gave it some thought. It'll change the way I recommend cameras going forward. I think button layout is a very important thing that we overlook. But yeah, the layout of the buttons wasn't the best for me, but I was still able to get it done. At the end of the day, I think DSLRs the experience of having to rely on the exposure meter, and possibly I think if you can turn on, if your camera supports it, the exposure meter plus the histogram, I think is enough to really help you nail that exposure time and time again. But there are tools that are there to get it right. You know, when people talk about mirrorless versus DSLRs, they speak about DSLRs if they're so archaic. Like, no, they're not. They still work. It was a very comfortable experience, of course, and I will continue to document the day-to-day quarantine life using the Canon. So it just gives it a purpose, and it gives it a chance to be in my camera rotation. I'm enjoying it. Yeah, and it's a comfortable camera to hold. I don't even remember how much megapixels this thing have, because it doesn't matter. The images are detailed enough, sharp enough. The nifty 50 sharp enough, no qualms at all. But yeah, interesting. I wonder how much this thing goes for. It was a good experiment for me, and like I said, I'll continue to keep it in rotation. But let me know if you guys ever go back to some of your old gear. And it reminds me of a video I did on this channel a while back. You know, your camera gear never gets old. It's not like cell phones or anything like that. Still very capable as the same day I bought it, and I'm happy about that. My name is Ramon. Thank you for checking out the video. Like the video if you like it. Subscribe to the channel if you want to see more. And I'm out of here. Peace.